Good evening. We'll enjoy the opportunity to start the committee of the whole meeting on time this week. It's been rare the last couple months. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk. Alderman Talaco is
Excused, she's sick tonight, was unable to make it.
okay. Alderman Meyer. Alderman Hancher. Alderman Bach.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Gebhardt.
Here.
And Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up is approval of the meeting minutes from November 14th.
Move approval.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions, corrections? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. Moving on, we have two discussion items. First is the discussion regarding a city survey, and I think Assistant Administrator Schoeneman is going to take over the presentation here at this point. Take it away, Justin.
Sounds great. Thank you. So we'll dive right in. The city of Mequon, as I mentioned in the memo, has a long history of conducting community-wide surveys. We have done 4 since 1999, roughly every 4 to 7 years. The most recent one was completed in 2019. Public welfare was the main driving force behind the last community survey, and the work at the committee level started roughly around April of 2018. That ultimately culminated in a contract award to the Strategic Research Institute at St. Norbert College up in Appleton, Wisconsin. They partner with a company called Neighborhood Analytics, and pretty much from that point on, they were our primary partners to complete the survey. There was at least 6 meetings at public welfare. The majority of that time at those meetings was dedicated to the survey instrument development, and there was committee of the whole sessions and special invitations to the council members to come on down to public welfare and join in the fun. All that work culminated in a survey that had roughly 30 questions over 8 general areas. You always want to get your demographic information of who's responding, and then the rest of the survey touched on a wide number of topics, everything from development, economic development, open space preservations, to some of our assets like the community pool, parks and pathways, and our community services. So what a survey is about is really up to the organization, and it can be a really useful tool to help us understand what our residents feel and where we'd like to see the organization go. And looking ahead, if we want to continue that tradition of a survey every 4 to 7 years, we're at the point where we're looking for some feedback from the Common Council on where to go next. And looking in from my angle, there's 4 general questions to talk about tonight. When, how we're going to do the survey, who we'd like to use, and what we want to survey the public on. So the first question I have for the committee here tonight is when should we conduct the survey? In the packet I included a proposed timeline with the intent to try and have the survey wrap up shortly before we undergo a strategic plan update. The current plan is set to expire, I believe, end of 2025, and would then be updated end of that year or early 2026. So if we start here in Q4 of 2024 to get all the administrative work and the first part out of the way and hit the ground running in 2025, we could have a survey completed before summer hits, and a lot of the public are out enjoying the great weather and vacations while school is out of session. Alternatively, we could also look to survey the community potentially in September or October before our snowbirds go south for the winter, and as school's back in session, so hopefully those families are back in town. So I guess my question for the council tonight is, what do you think of the proposed timeline? Does it sound okay? Suggestions? Thoughts?
Well, any feedback from anyone on the committee is welcome on the timeline. Alderman Meyer.
A long driving force for us in initiatives that the city has taken
driven by the surveys. And Town Center was driven by the surveys, and a number of different developments that we've had that have done that, like the different corridors that we did developments into that. And the reason why that we sent out the survey to do that is, first of all, to see what the temperature was of the residents, to see if they were favorable, these types of things. And we found that, you know, that through the surveys, that we had support in some stuff and not too much support in the other things in that. So the stuff that we had support on, which was, like I said, some of the development in different corridors, and also like the town center, the development of that, that we moved forward on them, and so it was a direct reflection of not only stuff that we had worked on here, but then we had residents that were in support of that. So it's nice to have that, to do that survey, to do it. So.
Any other feedback on the proposed timeline?
I
Alderwoman
think
Schneider.
the fall might be the best time to do it from what you've described, because I think we want to capture as many residents as we possibly can for input. And I think that might be a time when we might be able to capture them. I think it would be good for us to, similar to what Alderman Meyer was saying, to have kind of an overarching theme of, you know, sometimes it's economic development or residential development, or just I think that we have discussed, for instance, having an industrial area down in the southwest corner of the city, for instance, but I can't think of anything large like that is on the horizon that we would like to get input in. So I'd be curious to see what some of the other members think.
I think, yeah, we could certainly take time in 2024 to get some topics out there. I know question development is, once you have the consultant, they like really wordsmith things to try and make it neutral so you're not leading people to an answer. But that doesn't mean we could do a little legwork up front to develop some of the main themes of interest. You know, the item you mentioned being one, there might be others that others are interested in as well. But we could do that in parallel leading up to that, so we're a little prepared when the consultant gets online. In fact, we probably should, otherwise it probably take more than 2 months to do question development, just based off of the last go around. There's a little legwork up front, and then they really have to wordsmith it to be a statistically relevant survey, and they're the pros at that. I'm certainly not. Did I see Alderman Strelchek's hand up?
I'm glad to see this. It seems like the biggest pressing issues, you know, we had a somewhat divided political environment, you know, several years back, and the survey really helped get the voice of customer, voice of resident, and helped us to listen to not only what our constituents were saying, but also be able to look and review the statistics and see where the numbers are. And, you know, some of it was interesting, like District 1 would vote different than other districts, and in areas that you didn't always expect it. And it really kind of kept your feet to the ground, you know, as you're evaluating things, and helped you represent your constituency with where you were going. Town centers, mostly in motion, are pretty well developed. There's a couple, you know, areas that are looking to fill in. There's really not a ton pressing. But that also being said, I never want to stop listening in this office, and I never want to stop listening quantitatively to understand what residents want. I think my feedback on timing, you know, just not even looking at the schedule, I'd like it when all the residents are here and the snowbirds aren't gone, with plenty of time to respond. I'd like everything into council to be read and reviewed prior to setting and having budget discussions. I don't want to have it come a month or two after some of our heavier budget discussions, and then we lose a whole year. So whatever that timing lines up, you know, getting that info and those facts for budget would be great. One of the things that I'm hearing is that we've got people asking for certain things in parks and certain amenities in parks that we're not addressing now. The pool was a topic that we discussed, I think it was 3 years ago. What I want to understand from that is, where do people want it? what are our funding options and what's the tolerance for funding on that. You know, I really believe that our community is built around an area where people can, you know, live, laugh, and play, and spend their time and enjoy it in the community center to give them a sense of community. So, you know, me personally, I'd love to see it here, but, you know, even ask if there's outside parks. You know, other Rotary was one option that was listed at one point in time, and we've talked about several other locations. So, really kind of understanding that. And then I'm constantly getting hit up for pickleball courts. Like, it's every time I go and I talk to a certain group, they're like, when are we having pickleball courts? What are we putting in? How many are we going to get? Really kind of staying ahead of this timeline, making sure that we've got the amenities that the residents want so they continue to stay within Mequon to do their activities. With the development of Town Center, it was great. You know, we've got dining. You know, people are leaving their homes to stay in Mequon and do things in Mequon where they were sometimes going to a restaurant here and then many times leaving the community because we didn't have enough, and now we've got even more and a sense of community. So, you know, those are the drivers for me that I'd like to see. Sooner the better as far as I'm concerned. I'd even do it as soon as next year, just to keep that pool moving if nothing else.
Sounds good. So the general timeline seems okay, with a preference towards having the survey completed in fall to survey residents.
Yeah, I think that I like the timeline. I do like the fall. I agree. I think that would be a good time. I also like the idea of tying it to what the next strategic initiatives will be. So, you know, hopefully that would be, you know, that would cover what many of us are thinking of. Or so, and then I'm sure there'll be a couple other questions, but it would be nice to tie those two together.
Alderman Meyer, or I'll get that. Alderman Hancher next, sorry.
The one thing that piggyback on what he said about a couple years ago, we did strategic planning and we had the arching themes. If there's some way that you could have those arching themes in the survey, so that the residents are aware of what we're trying to do too, so that they're in the loop on, you know, how we see the future.
Probably a good idea to structure survey questions along the same lines as the strategic plan. Yeah.
It's not just us talking about it, but the residents see that this is our plan.
Alderman Meyer.
The timeline of when it goes out and when we get results seems good. The start of it, I think, is late. Started in the fourth quarter, and from experience in doing the last couple of them, it takes months and months and months to get feedback from different committees and that, because we want to include all of them. We want to include the bikeway, we want to include parks, we want to include all them with ideas that they may want to put inside of it. We may not put all those ideas inside of the survey because there may be too many of those ideas that get inside there, or we may put them all together in one question or two questions, but we need to get that input from all those committees. We need to get that in, and sometimes those committees don't meet all the time, and sometimes it takes 2 months for them to even get to it, and then all of a sudden they spend another month trying to formulate questions. So I think we need to start the process of the questions and that, getting that out earlier than the fourth quarter inside of it, because I think, you know, it's going to take months to get the proper questions together for it. The last time we did this, we had formulated the questions from the Common Council. We did it from the different boards and commissions and that stuff, and we got those all in. We had community input and had some stakeholders that we had stuff that we wanted to have in there. And then once we kind of formulated those questions for it in a broad sense, we then went and got the consultants to take those questions and to start finalizing some of those things so it was more understandable for the residents in that. We didn't want to have the consultants directing us to, we wanted them directing us on how to ask the questions, but not the questions themselves. So we had that kind of at a later date that we got them on board with it so they could finalize those questions and that stuff for us. So I think the process needs to start sooner. I'd also like to find out how what's the process, we're gonna follow the same process we went beforehand, like through public welfare, to do a lot of the legwork inside of that, which was the last 3 surveys is that's how we did that, was going through that. And if you plan on doing that the same way, so we can start working on that and public welfare, and of course the Common Council, we had a number of people coming in at that time to step in and give their answers and give their questions on cyber public welfare. So what is your plans on doing that?
So my intent would be to still utilize public welfare as a sub-body of the Common Council, if that's okay, to go through the initial part of the process like we did in 2019. And to help build in more time for those meetings, if we're pushing the survey date back or month from May to maybe like September, October, that's another 4 to 5 months. That'll be in our timeline that one was included in the packet. So I think we're gonna be able to build in more of that time you're starting to refer to, and be able to hit getting the survey done in fall and then results into the Common Council there as well.
I'll make a suggestion. Maybe we'll have another election in April, and maybe that's a good time to pick it up and start gathering that info. You'll have April, May, June, July, August, those months to start gathering questions from the subcommittees, and then we can, in parallel with these RFP steps that are in the plan here, we could be cooking that list down amongst this group. Maybe public welfare is done by then. We bring it to committee of the whole to do the final cooking of whatever's in the sauce there. And then we can do that in parallel with the RFPs, and then we've got a list of questions and a vendor right off the bat January 1, and they can start right into wordsmithing our questions and doing the things they're best at. But we can have all of our discussions out of the way in advance. Does that sound acceptable? I saw Rob's hand first. I'll go with Alderman Stralchek and then move back here.
Yeah, and it's a question for the aldermen that were here, as well as city staff. If I remember correctly, last time we had questions, there was a little back and forth, and if I remember correctly, it was a few months that we, hey, the questions really aren't right. We wanted to kick it back to the vendor to kind of rewrite a few, review it at public welfare as well as the council, maybe a committee of the whole meeting. I wouldn't move it back months. I would move it forward in the 24 and just get some of the legwork done. I think I think there's going to be more back and forth on the questions.
I think the timeline I proposed would put the onus on us to get that work done up front, so we knew kind of what we wanted, and then we'd have basically January, February, March to hash it out with the vendor to ask it the right way. But we can have a good idea what we want going in.
Yeah, if we select a firm in December and January sometime, I don't think it'd be a problem maybe to get some questions, January, February, and then have until March to, maybe send a revision back and have it go through committees, and still be on time for what we're doing. But, just a word of caution. I just remember that being
I think some of
a talking point.
I think some of the groundwork needs to be done like you're right ahead of time, for it, and get that out, and as soon as we possibly can, get that out to committees of what they think should be some of the questions inside of it. There's no harm in getting it out soon, right now, or within a month or something, to get that out and just let them know we're thinking about that and what are their ideas.
Now, April seems like the right time to start, just because we may have a new alderman or two. You never know. We'll have new committee assignments for sure, and then there'll be no changing of horses midstream, and just start right off the bat and on to the finish line.
Yeah, and I think it'd be after going through the last survey, and as we looked around for vendors, we learned that all the vendors out there, and part of their package they offer to be there from beginning to end. So from day one of question development to the final survey. So we can leverage our vendor, because we're going to be paying for it anyways, to help us develop those questions and work with us. I think would be ideal. and at the same time to help free up staff to work on our other priorities the council has talked about, like land management, Lemke Park, Pavilion to brush site next year too. So if we can bring in the consultant and that'd be helpful on the front end. And if we're ultimately trying to get results into around the strategic plan, waiting to mid-year is more ideal. Otherwise, we're gonna have a kind of a drawn-out process, and we can streamline it.
Another idea that you could do is, have a steering committee too, so it's, I mean, I've been on those before where you have a group of, some people are really good at putting together surveys and have really good knowledge, and some people have, statistics backgrounds, and so if you had like a steering committee of interested people that kind of worked on it, that's just another idea.
We've done that with the consultant, and public welfare's been the steering committee in the past, but we certainly can and should probably use this meeting at some point in the process. Otherwise, we don't want public welfare going off and then having to redo it because we introduced it to 5 more people all at the same time and got diverging opinions. So we can feather committee of the whole in towards the end, let public welfare do the heavy lifting up front as they get a little farther, then switch over to committee of the whole when the time feels right. Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. Good comments, everyone. My comments relate to format of the survey. As I recall, the last survey, I was actually guilty of throwing it away myself. Just it looked like spam, junk mail. And I noticed in the packet you implied maybe we'll just be doing 100% electronic, which I'd probably be in favor for. We just need to make some opportunities for people who don't have computer access, especially elderly, things like that, to assist them. I'm not sure how that works. If we are going to do something in the mail, it would be nice to do it with a City of Mequon envelope, because I think people will open that.
Yeah, that's great. That's the second question on the list, is the how, for how the conducting the community survey. Historically, just going back to '99, those are very paper-driven surveys. Our last survey was largely paper with the online component to it, and that's I guess how the council wants to proceed. We can go with a fully paper-driven survey again. We can have a fully electronic survey where all respondents get like a postcard, a letter, or something official from the city about the survey, and then essentially, depending on the vendor, they probably do it a little differently, but it's like a QR code or a website, the link, and a code where we can go online and then fill out the survey. And the other option is a hybrid approach where maybe the majority is electronically driven, and then you have a paper component to it. So like Alderman Parrish is referring to, if you have a resident who doesn't want to use the computer but would prefer a paper survey, you then could send one out to them, or they could maybe pick it up at City Hall, for instance.
Yeah, paper on request. Good idea.
But we
Alderman
still have to,
Meyer.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, you still
I'm so
on that
sorry,
thought?
Mayor, but we
Yeah,
still
go
have
ahead.
to, they still have to find out about it, so we'll still have to do like postcards and
Yep.
all that good stuff.
Yep,
So
we'll
there's still
publicize
mailings
it.
no matter
and
what.
You got it. No matter what options picked, we'll publicize it everywhere and anywhere possible. Postcards, we have road signs we'll put out, we have ads we'll run in papers, you name it. We'll work to drive a good response rate.
As long as those signs aren't in the street preserved area.
Yes.
Alderman Meyer.
Yeah, the last time it was, the survey itself was 100% paper. Doesn't mean it can't be hybrid this time, but it was 100% paper, and then we had the component that was online, and that was a survey for the city staff. And it was for services, and what the residents thought were, how the services were for the city. So we, instead of having that included that in the actual survey itself, I think that was the second component that we had, that was online component for it, if I remember correctly.
I think that was one of the ideas we tossed around, but I believe what ended up going out was the ability each household got one paper survey, and then they could go online to complete a second one, so the resident could complete the whole thing online. Or they could then also get another paper copy if needed, if there's like a second adult in the house.
Yeah, certainly you only want to mail so much paper if you're doing it that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise it gets expensive quickly. So, do we need the, that's the how.
Yep.
I'm guessing you're just collecting some general feedback.
Yep,
We'll come
I
back
am.
with that.
You got it. So that's the how. So it seems like we're okay with a general hybrid approach, maybe default electronic, but we can follow up with paper, and we'll be able to refine that more once we get our vendors narrowed down and ultimately selected through public welfare. And in the packet, I referred to one vendor. It's from my most recent research. They seem to be one of the top tier out there, which is Pulco, who has the National Research Center as part of their entity, and they deliver a really good survey. But they're not the only ones out there. There's everything from Zen City to ETC Institute to our old partners we used in 2019 that we can go through and revet as we go through the next survey process. So staff is okay, if the council is okay with it too. We'll take the first whack at it and review the consultants, bring forward recommendations to public welfare for their ultimate selection and recommendation over to here.
Just quick, did we reach out to the other cities that have recently done the surveys? I'm sure you did, to find out who they did, who they used.
I did not do it leading into tonight, but that's definitely something I can do.
Okay, is there any other specific feedback you're looking for? Is
The
there-
last one
Last one?
is just if there's any if there's any specific topics council members had in their minds that they wanted us to take notes on at this point. Staff will be back in the future to gather more input as well.
Or you can assign us a homework assignment.
Yes, you guys are welcome to follow up via email, phone, or I'm happy to meet as well.
Might be good if people over the next few months thought of a few topics, and then should we have those directed towards Justin then? And we can just collect for now, and then the work can start just put them in a holding bin. The work can start in April then with the committee.
If after tonight, I can circulate the strategic plan to members of the council.
Yeah, we've got that document. Yeah,
Yep, I can send it to you.
yeah, I think it's on the website.
Mm-hmm.
I keep forgetting not all of us were here when we created it, so it's probably good if you're relatively new to review it. Certainly good idea. Any other feedback from the committee? Administrator Jones.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the committee. In listening to the conversation here this evening, obviously we spent a fair amount of time talking about the timeline. I heard interest in doing this before budget, and budget occurs during the fall, and I also heard interest in doing the survey in the fall when we're in budget. So at least as I sit here, I'm a little unclear as to where we fall on the timeline from a calendar year perspective. The other thing I'll just throw out for the committee's consideration is April 2025, springtime, a year from next spring, will be a mayoral election. And while that may not factor greatly into our overall consideration of when to do a survey, those elections tend to draw a little more interest from the community, and I just throw that out there for us to think about from a timing perspective. So I heard spring and I heard fall, and it would be helpful if we could come out of here tonight understanding where the committee generally lies.
I'll parrot back what I thought I understood was the timeline presented was generally good, but there's some legwork that needs to happen ahead of the Q4 milestone that kicks this off. And that I'm envisioning that starting in around April, where the committee starts to gnaw on questions. And that should be a committee-led thing, and maybe staff's there to guide, but it's not like a pile of work for Justin, it's a pile of work for the committee to do. And generate those questions and gnaw on them. And then as it moves along, I kind of envision it getting to committee of the whole about the time where we're going out to solicit quotes, so we can keep grinding on it with the thought of us being done grinding on all that. So that by the time we have a vendor, we can do question refinement. So we've got the topics and some of the general questions, but not wordsmithed in survey format, but the kinds of things we're interested in. And then they can help us take that body of work and refine it and put it into a relevant, statistically meaningful, non-leading, word-neutral survey. So I think the timeline's good, just acknowledging, I think everyone's acknowledging there's a little bit of work we've got to do leading into that, so we're really ready, so that we don't slip these dates. Alderman Strelchak.
Yeah, Mr. Jones is correct. We did say survey in fall, and then the timeline says April, May. So again, I think the biggest thing is just having snowbirds home and able to voice, really what they want to see within their community that they live in. So
I think this is the timeline we went with last time. Everyone starts to get back in May, June, and then they have a chance to take the survey. That's when the weather starts getting nicer here. I'm not sure when they leave, but lots of them do leave in the fall. Alderman Hancher.
But if we're gonna send them out electronically, then they'll be able to get them anywhere, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm sorry. If we're gonna send them electronically, then it doesn't make a difference where they are.
I
If
think
they're
we'll
here-
probably send a postcard.
Okay.
We don't have their emails.
A postcard to
Correct.
every address I'm envisioning, because we only have a subset of all the total number of email addresses.
Okay.
And we have a lot, but we don't have anywhere close to all of them.
yeah, and just keep in mind that bulk mail or nonprofit mail doesn't always get forwarded, I don't think. So we should check into how we're addressing those from a mailing standpoint. I think it might need to go
There's
first
no
class.
perfect process.
I know.
Alderman Meyer.
I got a question for you then, Will, on the timing. So, and if you take a look, it says the final presentation of the results of the Common Council in June, and that's 2025. And I know that you started budget. If there is some kind of initiative that Common Council said, hey, we'd like to have this, maybe partially some of this in the 2025 or 2026 budget to do that. What is that time frame for you then to get that going?
Good question, Alderman Meyer. The time frame up on the screen is the perfect time frame. Having that information and having that feedback from the council early on in the budget process, we really kick it off in late June, early July with the capital side, and then we begin developing the operating budgets late July, early August. So if we can stay true to the timeline otherwise up on the screen, that works perfectly.
Yeah, that'd be my main concern to, if we had some kind of major thing we wanted to move forward, the Common Council did for some reason, to have that give you enough time to at least formulate, say, hey, I can do that or I can't do that, in this budget. Okay.
Good question. Always got to worry about the money. Any other feedback on the timeline? Or the who, when, what, where, how? Did you get what you needed,
I do.
Justin? Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other last questions? I think we all walked away with a homework assignment to start pondering this. If there's ideas, to forward them to Justin to keep a list, and then we can start moving out more formally on that around the April timeframe. All right, thank you. Moving on from that item, we've got a maybe brief presentation, I don't know, from our city attorney on all the statutory law changes with potential impacts to what we do here in Mequon. So the state's always doing new things and we have to constantly react to it. So getting a little preview here. Take it away. I think that mic might be dead. We had problems at Planning Commission last week too.
Justin turned it off on me. That helps. So as I was saying, that recognize that each of you may have individual specific questions on some of the legislation that I identify in the memo. Feel free to just interrupt and ask on those. I do have a slide at the end that tries to cover everything, but I do anticipate that we probably won't get to that. So if you do have a pressing concern, feel free to interrupt. With that in mind, just kind of a quick review of 2023 rather. Pretty wide-ranging span of things that we've done, ranging from swimming pools and nuisance to some building code updates, some zoning code updates as well, and then lastly, some just kind of operational type Chapter 2 boards and commissions type updates, and really ending the year with the sign code. As I mentioned in my update, that went to Planning Commission this month, and we anticipate that will be subject to final review here in the first part of 2024. So with that said, I'm going to start just with the shared revenue bill. Obviously this received a lot of attention when it got passed, mostly because it resulted in more money for all of the communities. There are some elements of it that are not necessarily purely monetary that we did want to just address, make you aware of things that may be addressed. First is that it did eliminate the personal property tax. That is something that the state has promised that we're going to be made whole for, and shouldn't be an impact to us, but of course we are going to monitor that and make sure that that comes through fruition, and that we continue to maintain that level of compensation that we anticipate there. There's also a requirement that each community do what they call a maintenance of effort certificate for their police and fire departments. In essence, because they tied some of this extra money that they gave to cities to public safety, what they wanted to do was make sure that communities then weren't backing down from the level of service that they were otherwise providing, both in terms of staffing as well as monetary supports as well. And so that's a certification that you're going to see coming forward on an annual basis as part of that process. There were some changes to the levy limit and the adjustments specifically within the levy limit, none of which are particularly pressing or important as it relates here, other than to just note that you'll recall we had a discussion when we consolidated dispatch. There were some questions about how that levy limit adjustment worked. The change here really solidifies the position that we were in, which is that that type of consolidation wouldn't have an impact on our individual levy unless we wanted it to. The two kind of land use related, although not totally land use related, but the most unrelated to monetary components. First is that it did prohibit the use of advisory referendums within the state, with certain exceptions. There are certain things, for example, when you do a shared revenue agreement with a different community, those need to go to referendum. Those still can, stay in place. But the typical, should the state adopt, this particular type of regulation, those types of advisory referendums are prohibited. And then lastly, it made some changes as it relates to land use approvals for certain quarrying operations within the state. Obviously, we don't have a lot of quarrying operations here within the community, and because of that, it doesn't impact Mequon significantly, in the sense that really it basically allows you to stay doing what you're doing without restrictions, but that local communities can put some restrictions on new operations as they move forward. So kind of a one benefit to the community there. Next, Act 16, which is really centered on regulation of property development, and more particularly focused really on residential development in a lot of ways. one of the biggest changes is that it just broadened the scope of judicial review for decisions that are related to residential development. It accelerates the timeline for judicial review. It makes it a little bit easier to qualify for judicial review of certain decisions, and it's really designed in a method to try to assist developers to get their approvals done and finalized in whatever form that ultimately is going to mean in a rapid and time sensitive manner. Another change is that the statute now requires that if we get an application for a residential development, both single family and multifamily, that otherwise meets all of the requirements within the code for that type of application, assuming that it's a complete application, we have to approve it. You can't say no just because, well, we don't feel like it in this case. It kind of hamstrings us a little bit on that end. The biggest change perhaps for Mequon is that it eliminates protest petitions altogether. Those of you who were on the council not that long ago will recall that we went through a significant discussion of, what should protest petitions look like, because the legislature last session, either way, a couple years ago, made some changes, basically made it not required for development, but didn't prohibit it outright. And so there was the discussion, do we want to keep it or not? We went through a big discussion about what that should look like. The legislature has now come in and said, nope, we were just kidding. You're not going to be able to do those at all. Perhaps the biggest issue code-wise for us is that it does bake in a just pure simple majority vote is sufficient for a rezoning application. As I think all of you know, we require otherwise a 6-vote situation. Under the statute, actually, we're going to have to change our code for rezonings to allow for that 5-vote situation to occur. So that'll be kind of a significant change here.
Excuse me. So is that a done deal, or is that?
Yes, yeah, that's a done deal. These are the acts that we're talking about are all past legislation that have been signed by the governor at this point. So that
one's too bad. It's really anti-resident, pro-development, and takes, we have to update our code now, and that's really unfortunate.
I mean, it's certainly, from my perspective, as I talk with my colleagues around the state, it's the 1 or 2 bad apples across the state that kind of ruin it for everybody else. And we're going to talk a little bit, if we have time, about some future legislation that we're keeping our eye on. And it's the same kind of thing there, where you've got individuals or communities that are really going above and beyond in terms of being unreasonable, in my opinion, that has forced lobbyists to go to the state and try to claw back some of those powers to developers or individual property owners. And so I think that's a result of what you're seeing there, is part of that. The last kind of component of that Act 16 on property development regulations is that it changes the language in the PDD statute. This is one of those interesting circumstances where the state comes in and says, hey, we're going to change this to make it different, and there's a whole lot of us that practice in this area and say, well, you didn't really change anything because we all interpreted it this way anyway. But in short, what the statute, the state says now, requires on plan development districts is that you can only approve those where the property itself would benefit from coordinated site development, diversified location of structures, and mixed compatible uses. And basically have said that you need all 3 of those in order to do a PDD. I will tell you that both Mequon and lots of other communities across the state really just focus on kind of that's an or type situation that we're looking to see, do any of these apply, and then we're going to approve a PDD. But the statute in this case did change to say that it no longer needs to be just mixed compatible uses, but that you can in fact have a PDD that has just a single use within it. So if you wanted to do just a residential PDD, for example, that's perfectly okay under the statute now. Although, as I've indicated, we've typically interpreted it that way anyway. So those are kind of the two relating to development and other type of circumstances. The biggest change and the most sweeping change is Act 73. It really deals with alcohol regulations in the state, and then also, as you'll see, some regulations of vaping products as well. It is a sweeping change to the way the state regulates alcohol. It starts at the beginnings just simply by creating what they're calling the Division of Alcohol Beverages, or DAB as they like to call it. And that new division within the Department of Revenue really becomes the kind of end-all and be-all as it relates to alcohol regulation here within the state. It also kind of preliminarily clarifies an issue between state and federal law as it related to hard seltzers. Under federal law, they were classified as beer, and we actually classified it as hard alcohol here in Wisconsin. The statute change does clarify that we're going to take that federal approach and classify hard seltzers as beer as part of that. Not necessarily anything we need to be worried about, other than we just recognize that hard seltzers probably qualify to be sold under a B type license, which is beer related licensing. The perhaps biggest change for municipalities that are going to have to work on is that the legislature created what they call full service retail outlets. These are outlets that primarily are things that producers of alcohol, so brewers or folks that ferment hard alcohol or wine, are able to effectively have up to 3 individual locations, just retail premises where they can sell their products. In addition, they can, as a full service bar, effectively on their premises itself, so where they brew the beer, for example, they are able to also have full service restrictions there, and to do what they wish. Interestingly, of those 3 locations that they're able to just have a retail outlet that they establish elsewhere, the statute allows one of those to essentially be relocated whenever the permit holder desires. And so we anticipate that this is going to really codify what we've seen them do otherwise. For example, when we do the beer gardens in the park, that typically is done under that brewer's permit to do those types of things. What it really does is it allows that brewer to potentially be able to do a full service type circumstance, not just the beer, but they'd be able to do hard alcohol and wine as well, as part of the services that are provided in those locations. So makes it a little bit easier perhaps for those types of activities. Interestingly, notwithstanding the fact that the legislature likes to take control away from local municipalities mostly these days, they did indicate that we can limit the scope of alcohol that are sold in these particular outlets. So in other words, if we have a brewer of beer and they wanted to serve hard alcohol of some sort, we could actually enact an ordinance that said, no, as part of these standalone full-service retail outlets, you can only sell your own products. You're not going to be able to sell other things, and that is a regulation that would be permissible under the statute. Something that certainly we can consider as we look to incorporate these statutory changes into our local code. The code also allows for a restaurant to be located at these premises, whether it is the standalone retail outlets or the the manufacturing facility itself. And so that's really going to incorporate some zoning issues we anticipate in terms of how that's going to work. And then they did establish that the closing hours are the same regardless as a typical Class B license holder. And so it really gives wineries, for example, who had very limited hours, it gives them a much broader scope of hours that they can potentially operate in this circumstance. Additional changes that relate to alcohol that we need to be aware of is that it does provide that you can have samples. Any manufacturer can give samples at any retail establishment, whether it's their own or somebody else's retail establishment. So if they wanted to go to Sendix, for example, to give their samples away, that they could do that. There are some restrictions in terms of the amounts and what happens to the open bottles at the end of the day, that kind of stuff. But it makes it much easier to provide samples under the revised statute. You recall we just last meeting, I think it was, talked about potentially granting Thiensville one of our reserve licenses. The statute actually now provides that it doesn't need to be an adjacent community within 2 miles. It can be any community within the county, either wholly or partially. And so Thiensville now certainly could go to Grafton or Port Washington or somewhere else within the county to seek that reserve license as part of that. So doesn't really apply to us given the decision we made, but it was interesting nonetheless to point out. They did change Class C licenses. It used to be that you were very limited as to who could actually hold a Class C or a wine-only license, as they're known. The statute did change that you can basically any qualified individual for any alcohol license can get a Class C license. So we may see more of those types of licenses issued within the community potentially as a result of that. Big changes as it relates to the 2024 Republican National Convention. Here in southeast Wisconsin, it extends the closing hours of bars, and you can stay open till 4 a.m. During the couple days that the convention is going to take place. We can create a process to designate premises as ineligible. We may say that you, for whatever reason, are not able to stay open that late. Something that we could look at potentially doing, or we could just fully opt out altogether and just say, nope, we're not going to stay open till 4 a.m. We're going to keep our hours, the traditional hours that are within the statute. Something that is coming, but it's not until 2026 when it becomes in force at the state level, is what they call no sale permits. Event permits. These are really designed to deal with the kind of wedding barn type circumstances that we have, where the property owner wishes to hold an event. They're not going to sell the alcohol. They just plan on giving it away. This is an ability for those types of facilities to potentially get that. We raise it as really an issue here this evening, again, because this is going to start calling into some zoning type circumstances, and whether or not zoning is going to allow these types of uses in certain locations as well. So something to keep in mind. The most shocking to me change, which was I believe new, I don't even think this was in the original draft of the bill, that had been rejected earlier this year, is that they created a statewide operator's permit, so a bartender license effectively, that basically you apply to the state, you get one permit, and you're able to utilize that permit in all of the municipalities here in Wisconsin. And so you no longer would need to go to Mequon and Grafton and Thiensville to get 3 individual licenses. You're going to be able to get just one. Obviously, this may have a revenue impact on the community, depending on what the state ultimately decides the cost of that license is going to be. We, I believe, charge roughly $100, Madam Clerk, if I remember right. So if, you know, we're charging $100 and the state is charging $700 to recoup their cost, you know, we're going to continue to see probably the local licenses issued. If on the other hand, the state permit is $100 or $80 or whatever the case may be, we may see some of our operators seeking that state license because it gives them more flexibility. We're not going to then see that revenue, so we're going to want to adjust that.
So they're not saying we can't sell one, they're just saying they reserve the right to sell one and,
Correct.
okay. And if they've got the state one, we have to let them operate.
Correct.
Okay, that's odd. Usually they would set up their own thing and then take the right to sell it and tell everyone else you can't.
Yeah, I do suspect that this is another one of those circumstances where a few bad apples caused this particular provision to be incorporated within the statute. Folks that just denied licenses outright in every circumstance, for example, type of circumstance. Lastly, Act 73 just basically regulates vaping products just like as if they were cigarettes. And that relates to licensing, who can buy them, all of those types of things as part of that. Go ahead.
All vaping products, whether they're nicotine or not, are now being...
Correct.
So we were ahead of the times when we put our rules in?
Yep, I do anticipate we'll update our definition to match the state definition, but otherwise, yeah, we are a little bit ahead of the curve on that one, so.
Let's reach out to our police department for enforcement on this too. I don't know how much they're enforcing it, but it's definitely become a problem in the high school that I'm aware of.
So in the last couple of minutes, just kind of fly through some of those other acts that we had. Act 13 related agricultural road grants. I suspect that there's not going to be a lot of communities here in the southern part of the state that are going to think, oh, we're an agricultural road. The qualifications are very minimal. I think it's something that we should have the folks over at DPW take a look at and see. Obviously, there's going to be very limited funds. They're going to have to waive various grant applications, so we may not get any of the money because we'll fall low on the list, but it nonetheless is potentially some money to pay for redoing some of our more rural roads here within the city. Act 34 basically says that bargaining units, i.e. police and fire unions, can negotiate on certain elements of plan design. Important to note because we are going into a bargaining session this year. And then lastly, electronic communications with health plans in certain circumstances. So instead of getting 1 million pieces of paper, it can all be electronically done, assuming you meet the requirements. Elections, the two that were that were actually enacted really don't impact us. Retention of broadcasts of the counting of the ballots, we don't broadcast our count, so that's not really important here. And then Act 54 as it relates to that military versus overseas voters, really just kind of clarifies some technical aspects of that for us. It didn't really make a substantial change in how we do business. But as you see, and as I made mention, the legislature has been proposing all sorts of potential changes to election laws that the governor has been vetoing, and we anticipate that to continue. Mention that we're kind of keeping our eye on a couple acts. Assembly Bill 594 basically says that for design professionals, architects, engineers, landscape architects, you name it, that we can't within our contracts enforce indemnification clauses on them. So in other words, if they screw up, we have to pay for it. I'm not sure where exactly this is coming from other than just the general sense that I think that there are some communities that are just doing it, they're going too far with their indemnification requirements, and the design professionals are having problems actually getting insurance to cover it is what it sounds like. It's kind of taking the whole hammer to just kind of fix the small little problem that's there, but that's what the legislature does sometimes. Senate Bill 691, not real critical here, basically allows certain towns to declare themselves to be urban towns. As I mentioned in the memo, neither of the towns that are adjacent to us probably qualify based on their size, but it is a troubling piece of legislation because it basically makes, they can just say to us, hey, you need to provide us water and sewer service, and there isn't a whole lot of opportunity for us to say no. It's a really troubling bill that thankfully we don't have to worry about.
I wasn't familiar with the term in that memo of extraterritorial zoning.
Sure. Under the statutes currently, and it continues, all incorporated municipalities, so villages and cities, have what they call extraterritorial authority. So within towns that are adjacent to your community, and depending on whether you're a town or which class of city you are, that distance varies a little bit. But within that distance, you have the ability to make land use decisions for them, basically veto any land use decisions that they want. So if they wanted to put, for example, a garbage dump on your border, you could say no. And likewise, if they had a plat, you know, they wanted to do a huge subdivision that had, you know, thousands upon thousands of houses in it, you could say no, but by your virtue of being able to review that externally. So that's where that authority is, and we've exercised that from time to time here, but it's pretty unusual.
It's rare when it comes up.
Right.
It's, you know, we've got reach into the town of Grafton, for example. And there's been the oddball issue over the years that's appeared on a planning commission or other agenda because of that ability to do so. But we
Yep.
generally don't try to meddle too much unless there's something really objectionable.
And then lastly, in fact, there was an article on JS Online today about it, probably be in the paper tomorrow if you haven't seen it. But the bill that proposes that communities can start canvassing absentee ballots on the Monday before an election looks like it's likely going to pass at this point, and the governor has said that he'd likely sign it. So we're just kind of waiting to see if that does in fact happen at this point. So with that said, the other acts within the list there are just kind of listed there, none of which are particularly critical or important to discuss unless there's any specific questions. But we did want to just touch briefly on just kind of our implementation timeline, and this is just kind of what we're tentatively thinking. Sign code, obviously, as I mentioned at the outset, is really going to start the year off. We're going to finalize that through the council process, and likely all of the Development Act regulations that we talked about are going to follow very closely behind, because those provisions are already enacted and already applicable to us, so we need to incorporate them now. Some of the other things are a little bit farther out, and so we're just kind of moving throughout the year there as we go through, looking to address certain code provisions that are there. So just kind of a little preview of where we're headed.
Thank you. Any last questions from the committee? Or if you think of one offline, you can always hit the attorney up when the thought comes to you. All right. Thanks for that. The last item is just reviewing the committee of the whole planning calendar for 2024. So if there's any input on that, we can take it now, or we can always provide it offline as well. Any questions on the calendar coming up, or comments on the matters coming before us in the next few months? Hearing and seeing none, staff must have done an excellent job planning the calendar out. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn from committee of the whole?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.